Teresa, welcome to This is Horror.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here, and it is a rarity for me to be talking to somebody else in Japan. So we didn't have to do the whole time zone dance, which is often what we're doing on This is Horror.
Yes, a rarity for me too. Actually, it's the first time I think, so it was nice.
And I mean, to begin with, I want to go all the way back to your childhood because I understand that you were living in America, but you moved around a lot to various different locations. So I'm wondering what that was like for you and what perhaps some of the early life lessons were that you learned during those formative years.
So, yes, born in Texas. I think I was 6 months when we moved. My dad was in the Air Force. So we shot up to Alaska for a while, a couple years there. Then went down to the South, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, went to the Midwest, and only child. So I learned very quickly I guess, to adapt, like you're going from one place to another, and grades weren't as important to me as just trying to make friends. So, so that's, I think, what also kind of made it easy to come to Japan and fit in here because I'm just used to, I don't know, not being a chameleon, but yeah, like my own identity is like in there somewhere, but I can kind of adapt to what's around me.
And in terms of, not staying in the same place for too long, what was the place during your childhood, I suppose, where you stayed the longest?
Longest. Alaska was 5 years. So, and then I think Alabama was also 5 years. So yeah, it was kind of, which is another thing. Just bringing it back to Japan is like in Alaska you have the mountains and everything, and then we went to Florida or whatever, Alabama, and then you have the ocean. So it's kind of like I have both here. So it's like my whole childhood and through university, all the different places I lived, and it's kind of like this little microcosm of where I am now. I've got the mountains right here, and I turn over here, and I have the ocean right here, and I'm like, oh, this is comfortable. It feels like I've been here before, and yeah, so that's what's nice about being here.
And so I wonder too, I mean, people who are familiar with your work, of course, know that you have, well, to say a big interest in folklore would be understating it. So I'm wondering, was that something that came about from an early age? And I mean, also, what were your first experiences in terms of genre, whether that be through stories or movies or whatever facet of entertainment?
It's funny. One of my, I would say, like my earliest memory would be in Alaska, and I had to have been a toddler. And in the basement, my mom had the TV on, and she was watching some movie, and I think I found it was either an old black and white version of Poe's A Telltale Heart or something, but I just remember something about the floor. That's all. I'm just a child and I'm watching this, and someone's really upset about the floor, and my mom's like, she's scared, and I'm scared, and I was like, oh, I don't know what this is. So that's kind of like a very formative memory of mine of just this offness, like that something's going on that's not right. And then with folklore, I read a lot, I guess, because again, only child, moving all the time. It's really hard to make friends. Kind of, I guess I was a goofy little kid. So just read a bunch. My mom, when she was young, she grew up in Mississippi, and she got the polio shot, and she was actually in a classroom where everyone in the classroom got polio. Like they woke up the next day and like no kid, it was really just like traumatic. It's poor mom. So this mom, right? So she's in an iron lung for 3 years, but her parents and I guess friends would bring her comics. So the old, uh, just horror, like the originals comics. She just had hundreds of these originals, and so we go to Mississippi. I'm all by myself. There's no one to play with, so I just open up the cabinet and I just sit there, on the recliner and just read these. So that kind of got me in the mood there too. And it wasn't really hard folklore until I think I came to Japan and learned about yokai and stuff. And then I was like, okay, this is different. But the horror thing I've always been uh, putting my toe in, I would say.
Yeah, and I think Edgar Allan Poe is a tremendous entry point. I mean, that's gonna get you hooked from the
Yeah,
off.
yeah. Even now, it's kind of like my fall reading. There was a period of like what 10 years where the weather would start to cool off, and I just get out my tome and just read very slowly under a tree, and it's like, oh, okay, this is this is a story. So yes,
Yeah, I don't know if people outside the genre would agree, but I think this will resonate for people who love horror. But I definitely find Poe a comfort read. It's like very reassuring, something very inviting.
yeah, yeah. There's so much going on, and every time, yeah, you just read and you reread, and it's just like there's more and more to find.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
Poe himself is such a fascinating and unfortunately tragic figure as well. And goodness, there's something so sad about the fact that he will never know the
Yes.
impact that he made on the world.
And still making exactly. I had a friend that just mentioned there is a new book about him that's supposed to be really good, and I couldn't remember the name of it. And then I went and I kind of researched, biography, Poe, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many. I don't know which one to start with. So yeah, I'm kind of looking for that. I need to find that.
Well, I know that Bob will be able to tell
Oh,
what I'm about to say, but that there's a really good book called Poe for Your Problems, and we
oh,
spoke to the author of that book, Catherine Barb Muguera, is it, Bob? I don't know. My pronunciation normally is terrible.
Yeah, that's yeah,
But
that's right. And it's a interesting book because it goes through his life and basically is he's a tragic figure, but at the same time he was a badass. And he didn't care about nothing other than his loves,
mm,
and but when it came to other people, especially criticism, um he forged ahead anyway. And so it's a book about how you can take these common misconceptions that people have with Poe because of the type of personality that his image portrays
mhm.
compared to the monumental things that he did, and you apply that to your own life. And so it's a really good book, and it digs into a lot of the history that you won't find. I mean, you'd have to probably read a couple of actual critical biographies
Oh
to
wow.
get the type of information that she got, and it's just a
Oh,
really good book.
okay. I'm getting that as soon as we go. Got it
Mhm.
written down.
yeah, I think the unique selling point, or what really sets it apart from every other Poe book, is that I mean, in a way, it's part Poe's life story, but in another way, it's kind of a pseudo self help book or a kind of not what to do. And there's philosophy and almost an esoteric quality to it. So it really is a unique book. So,
What a
yeah, you'll
brilliant
have to let
idea,
us know
too.
how you get on
Yeah,
with it.
absolutely. Oh my gosh. And I'm looking for something new to read. So, yeah, I think thank you very
Yeah.
much, Catherine.
And so I'm wondering too, I mean, obviously you were ingrained in genre, particularly through comics, but were you writing your own stories at that point? Were you dabbling creatively with art? Was being a writer or a creative a concern from a young age?
Um, I remember. I don't know the date, but the day that I decided I'm going to be a writer was we had friends of the family for a long time. They were the Air Force, and we kind of moved in the same bases and everything, and grew up with them. Again, since I'm an only child, they were kind of like my siblings. And one of the older boys, I think he's 6 years older than me, so he's always ahead of me in everything. And he sat me down one day on his bunk bed. He goes, "I got this new book. You have to read this part." I'm 9 years old. It's The Shining. It's the bathroom scene, and I'm out. Like my mom would call him and say, "You have to make her sleep. She will not sleep." Like she just screams all night long. Since I couldn't. And went back to his place, whatever, they had a party or something. I went back and I'm just like, whoa, I need to read more of this book and everything. So he shows me what I'm reading. And then he also said, why don't you just write? You can write stories like this. Just try. Here's an old typewriter I have lying around, Here you go. And write your own stories. And it hit me like, okay, when I get older, like maybe I could write something that makes someone feel like I feel when I read him, when I read King. So yeah, and I was probably 10 years old. I was in a Catholic school, so this was fun. And I wrote a story about, this is so what's the word? Creative, a doll that like floats in your window, and I thought it was the scariest thing ever. And I remember going in and telling my teacher I was writing a book, and she was like, "Oh, that's so great! Oh, everybody, Terry, she's writing a book, and let's read pieces of it." And I'm like, "Okay." So here you go. And it started off, I guess, whatever enough, and then she got to the part where, and then there was a doll that blood dripping to whatever, and she's reading, and then she, "Okay, enough of this." And she just put it on my desk and never read it again. But I didn't give up, much like Poe. I kept going. But yeah, so that's kind of when I decided, all right, I want to give this a try. It's writing thing.
Yeah, and sometimes from people outside the genre, it's like you'll say, "I'm a writer," and it's like, "Ooh," and it's like, "I write horror." Ah,
Uh,
okay.
wait a minute.
But, I mean, Bob and I have had this come up so many times. It's like, actually, if the people who say that they don't like horror look at what they actually do like and they take a wider definition, they'll probably find that they like horror because there is horror in the vast majority of literature and stories. And I would say, that horror, it ignites conflict, it ignites storytelling. So if you insert horror into your stories, they're going to be better.
Yes, absolutely. I was just thinking, one of my favorite writers is Kurt Vonnegut. And people would say, "Oh, well, it's science fiction," but
So
oh
good.
hell no, there's horror in there. Like, oh, there are scenes in Sirens of the Titans. That's like, that is just awful. It is brutal. And then he does humor with it, which is just, that's I really, humor and horror together is just, so few people can do that, and it's so beautiful. So, but you're right, it's everywhere. Pick any movie. I'll show you
Yeah,
where the horror is.
yeah, Kurt Vonnegut was a genius. There's no other way to put it, and such a unique voice. If somebody's like, "What genre is Kurt Vonnegut?" Is like, he is the genre.
Yes,
That
yes,
is the genre.
yeah, that voice.
Yeah, there's an old movie called Back to School, and it's a Rodney Dangerfield movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it. And I know that you've seen it. Yeah, Michael may not have seen it. Where Rodney Dangerfield's a character has to go back to school. I can't remember why, but he has to go back to school, and he doesn't do any of the assignments. Of course, he's a rich guy; he can buy after. He buys Kurt Vonnegut to write an essay about Kurt. And Kurt actually shows up and brings him the essay. And it's actually Vonnegut. And he makes a C or something like that on the essay that Kurt wrote about himself. And I was like, that's actually probably pretty accurate. That Kurt would actually get a C on
Right,
his
right.
own writing about himself. And he did get a C, you
And the
know.
teacher's like, "You don't know Kurt," and Kurt's just sitting there like, like
And
you don't
Kurt's
know
probably like
Vonnegut.
going, "I
What is
don't
it?
even know me. What are you talking about?" But it's It's hilarious. And people who don't know when they're watching that movie, they think that's just some actor who shows up at his door with the essay. And I'm watching the movie going, that's really Kurt Vonnegut. And my friends are like, who in the hell's that? And I'm like,
Oh my gosh. Sit down.
but these are the same people. It's like, I don't like horror, but I like Stephen King.
Ah.
All right.
How has this movie eluded me that you're talking about, Bob? Is this a full-length movie?
Yes, it's a full-length movie. And the reason why it's eluded you is because other than a few key scenes, it's not very good.
I think I've only seen that scene.
Yeah, that and the other scene that I really, really like is when he does the dive. When he nails the triple thing that no one else could do but him, but other than that, it's Keith Gordon's in it. It's probably right before Keith got into directing. So I think maybe Keith had like maybe a couple of other movies after that he'd done. This is definitely after Christine. And Keith's a fantastic director. He's still in the business. He just doesn't act very often. So, but I think he had a horror movie come out a couple years ago that he directed, and I had to look it up and see. So he's trying to, he's still in the business. But other than that, I mean, you're not really missing anything. You can probably see the Vonnegut scene on YouTube.
Yeah, I think you can.
Oh, Sam Kinnison's in it. That's the other.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
And Sam loses his temper in the class and tears up the desk and screams at everybody. And Dangerfield says something about, if Johnson wouldn't have done it, and he's like, I like you, I think you're going to make it, so you have to see it. I'm not going to scream like he does, but he does the classic Sam Kinison stuff in there.
All right. Well, we'll put that in the show notes for anyone else who is intrigued. But we're going to take a hard turn towards Japan now, from Vonnegut to Japan. It's not always the route, but that's where we're going. So, I mean, you first went to Japan, I believe, in 1990. So, what experience or knowledge of Japan did you have prior to going, and why did you decide to go to Japan?
So it probably started with the Catholic school thing. I always, even when I was in first grade, so very young, had a problem with just, no offense to anybody who's Catholic or anything, raised Catholic, but I just had questions, and I was always asking these questions, and I was never getting these answers. And just religion bothered me, or at least what I was in was bothering me. So it kind of made me kind of look at other things. So I got junior high school, I got into Taoism and Wicca and Hinduism, even and Buddhism. And so I was just kind of studying all these different things. So from there, Wicca went to it was called the Circle in Wisconsin. And it was this like week or month long thing where you go it was really cool. And you go camping and you do all this really neat stuff. But woke up one morning and there was a couple doing Tai Chi, like on this little hill, and the sun's coming up behind them. I don't know what that is, but I want to learn what that is. Okay. Mental note, whatever this thing is, ask them, oh, this is Tai Chi. I don't know if they were good or not, but whatever, it looked cool. So when I get back home, I look for a martial arts school. There happens to be one that's teaching it. So go there, start studying martial arts. I'm like, this is kind of cool too. Oh, this Kung Fu, it's Chinese, but that's fine. I mean, that's what I wanted. I didn't know anything about Japan at the time, I don't think. And started learning Chinese, fell in love with the characters, couldn't pronounce anything, couldn't understand anything, but I did love the Chinese characters, the kanji in Japanese. And it kind of, from martial arts, I was into all the movies, I was into Jackie Chan, and it just kind of all overlapped and everything. Did go to China for a while in university just to see what it was like, but where I went was kind of, there's like dogs in the window for dinner and stuff, and I was like, oh, I can't live here, but I wanted to live overseas. I did get that. I got the whatever the excitement to like study overseas and not be in America, to move again and go somewhere totally new and learn a new language and get into this new culture. But yeah, China was a little hard for me. So I was my senior year in university. I'm wandering around the halls. I'm going to see my guidance teacher or whatever. And as I'm walking in the door, there was a poster like, Japan, 1 year's full bright scholarship, whatever. And I'm like, hey, like, don't Japanese use those same cool characters that I like so much? So I asked about that. I started studying a little bit, and it fit. Like I was able to speak it. I was able to understand it. I'm like, this is nice. And yeah, so I applied for that and came over. And then I was again like doing little kendo at the university, so the martial arts kind of overlapped too, and just ended up staying. I went back to graduate for like 6 months, but then came right back. So yeah, and I remember when I was writing, thinking to myself, I have no experience. Like, I want to write. I want to be a writer. But what am I going to write about? Like, I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I woke up and went to school today in my part-time job. So there's nothing, no experience. So coming here was also it's going to be hard. Let's see if we can do this. And maybe I can gain a little, not wisdom, but a little experience and something to write about. So that also helped the decision to stay.
Yeah, so it seems like all of the pieces for your life then started just fitting together and making sense, which is great,
Yeah.
for quite a lot of us. Like, do we ever find the pieces that quite fit together?
Mm-mm-mm.
Life is one hell of a puzzle. But I mean, so yeah, you were at university, so you took the year in Japan. You then came back for 6 months or so. You graduated. What's the window between graduation and then returning to
And
Japan?
I so I came for a year. I actually extended it for another year. So I was here for 2 years, then went back and graduated. But during the 2 years, I met my then to be husband. So
Mm.
whatever, we were going out. And then that was it. That was like, okay, I have to go back and I have to graduate. And he's like, hey, want to get married? And I was like, let me think about this. And then I did the whole like, it's going to be hard. My Japanese isn't that great. Oh, what am I going to do? Let's just go for it. So yeah. So then said yes before I went, graduated, then came back, and then yeah, still here.
And that thinking about whether you wanted to marry, did you just give us a real-time rendition of the time, or was it like you had like you're like, I'll get back to you in a few days, or was it on the spot?
It was probably like a year. It was kind of like we
Oh,
were talking about it, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
so
yeah.
it's here for a year, and we met during that first year, but then we were still going out and everything. And then it was kind of like, hey, you know what? And it was very wishy washy. It was kind of like, if I did propose to you, what would you say? I'm like, well, that's not. What's that? Okay, never mind. So we could go out for a little bit longer and everything. So yeah, it just kind of like happened. Yeah, it was very. Uh, it was kind of surreal, but it
Yeah,
worked out okay for the most part. Yes,
right.
we're not married now, so that's for a long time it was okay.
Yeah,
I'm still here. I'm
yeah.
still happy. So,
And I mean, in terms of learning Japanese, I mean, how did you go about that? And at what point would you say you got comfortable with Japanese as a language? And then at what point would you say you got fluent or near to fluent, depending on your definition?
so yeah, so the first year was like university stuff, so definitely not fluent, but just kind of. It wasn't until after getting married and we lived with his mother-in-law and father-in-law. His mother, my mother-in-law, and my father-in-law for uh, about 6 months or something, 6 months, 9 months. It was really interesting. She's a very, very interesting soul. She's extremely superstitious, and she kind of did this thing where she wanted to know me better. So she pulled out this. We had a place to live. We had a house we were going to rent. It was an old relative's house. It was a beautiful old place, but we're all ready to come back here, move in there. But she said, you know what? It's the stars aren't aligned right now, and it's bad luck for you to move from Omaha, to Japan, and then move into that direction is very unlucky. So what you could do, what's lucky, move into our house for 9 months and live with us for a while, And then after that time, then you can move to that house and it'll be okay. So she kind of waylaid us into moving there, which was fine. But it was during that time that just talking to her and like I was like, oh, all that studying, uh, that was one thing, but to actually be in it and no internet, so you get your dictionaries and writing things down and looking things up. So and then fluent, just little by little, and a lot of it was studying like things I wanted to write about and going to the library and again looking things up, still studying. So a couple years.
Yeah, and I recall that you said that your mother-in-law described you as sticky, and that means that like the spirit world and spirits would stick to you rather easily. So I think that's an interesting starting point for discussion. But I think something that would be useful too to kind of frame this whole conversation is, what are your beliefs in terms of the supernatural or lack thereof? What are your beliefs in terms of, the afterlife? Because I think that's always very interesting to get into that.
um, I've always had strange things kind of happen. I don't talk about a lot of them, but there's always been like things. I'm there. I'm very cynical about everything. Like everything, I'm the biggest cynic in the world, and yet things will happen, and I'm like, all right, that happened. Like, what am I going to make of it? Um, so we would. That's another thing. My mother-in-law she was also very, very into things like that. So we would talk about it a lot, and yeah, just like what an example. Okay, we live in this old house where me and my new partner were living in this old house that we bought, and there used to be an old man that lived here, and he passed away. We're pretty sure he passed away in the house because there are bloodstains on the ceiling upstairs, which are kind of freaky. Yeah, they can't get him out. It's pretty cool. I'll show you photos. So anyway, we don't know the story of how this person passed away or anything, but we kind of sometimes, like, you'll walk into a room and it'll smell like someone's smoking, and we're like, yeah, there's no one smoking here. Like, there's no windows open. There's 90-year-old and an 80-year-old living on either side of us. There's no, anyway. So, but Obon during August is when the spirits are supposed to come back to the house. And our first year here, it's probably the first year they were out. Like, they passed away, and the house was empty for probably a year. And the next year we moved in. So the the belief is that during Obon, the ancestors come back to your house and they stay there, and you welcome them and you give them, sake and fruit and everything, and then you're together, and then you send them off. So that Obon, it kind of felt funky, and I was thinking to myself too, I'm like, well, we have the area where there should be an altar, but there's not, and I wonder if we should do something to kind of like incense or something, just to kind of let the spirits know that it's not the right place, but if you're here, here's some incense. And then one day, I woke up early and I was downstairs and I was drying my hair or something. So I'm by myself. I'm downstairs and I sit down on the couch and I got my head leaned over and I'm drying my hair, and it just felt like you're not alone, like one of those, like, yeah. And I kept looking around because I thought my partner was downstairs and no one's here, no one's here. And then it felt like the cushion went down, like someone sat next to me. And I jumped and I was like, sure, like, okay, yeah, you're here, but no one's there. And I was like, okay, Grandpa. so I went out and I got some candy and I gave it to him, and I'm like, did the old pray. I'm like, here you go, you can go. So lots of things like that and other weird stuff. So yeah, I'm stuff's going on that we don't know about for sure. That I don't understand, but it's hard to. You don't want to open up too much to it because yeah, some bad stuff happens. So it's just getting through.
Well, I'm curious to ask more about that specific incident, but
Uh,
then you also said, and other weird stuff. So
oh,
let's hear about a few of
other
the
weird
other
stuff.
weird stuff things.
I
Let's hear
think
what's in that
the one
category.
the one that I actually will talk about, just because my son was there, and later he's kindergarten, he's like 6 years old or something. Um, so in Japan they have this thing called tanshin funin, and that's when the the father or whoever's making the money, the husband, has to live in a different area, prefecture or something. And it's so expensive to move, of course, that the family stays there. The wife and the kids stay there, and then the husband goes somewhere and he's off, for months and months working. He comes back on the weekends or whenever he can. So my ex used to do that a lot. Like, he was gone. And so he's not home. And used to, like, once a month he'd come back on the weekend. And we had the futons laid out 3 because he was little, and you do the 3 in Japan. You have the wife and the husband and the child. The child's in the middle. And how did it work? I woke up and I had it was like a lucid dream, and there was this horrible dark man there, and I sort of pushed up or something. I forget. I have to look at my journal. I wrote it all down, but he pointed at me. It was just this bad force, and he put his finger just kind of through my chest, and it just burned. I just remember how much it burned. And then I remember kind of screaming in my head. I remember worried about Julian. I remember I didn't want to look at Julian because I thought if I looked at him, then the whatever was looking at me would look there too. And I was like, okay, so I'm just, So all that happened at night. It was just whatever. And then I woke up the next day, and Julian woke up. We're fine. We're downstairs. We're eating. And Julian just looks at me and he goes, so did Daddy come home last night? And I'm like, no, he doesn't come home till, 2 weeks from now. No, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw you lying there, and Daddy was standing over you, pointing at you. It's like, you saw what? And it gets worse. It gets worse. So that was oh my God, mind blowing. And then I had days and days of just foreboding, something bad's going to happen. And I kept thinking it was going to be Julian. I'm like, oh my God. So he'd get on the bus to go to kindergarten, and I'd follow the bus because I'm like, oh, there's going to be an accident. There's going to be an accident. Couldn't put my finger on it. Something bad's going to happen. Something bad's going to happen. Turns out it wasn't Julian. I ended up having breast cancer. Exactly where he stuck his finger. And it was October. We went back to this. I wanted Julian to have Halloween in America. So we were going back, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's odd. And got a checkup in America. And he's like, yeah, you did the whole 9 yards, and boom. And I was 32. I was young too. So that was a little freaky. And just even now talking to Julian and do you remember what happened then? And he tells me what he said. He says, yeah, I remember seeing someone. So after that, there was lots of throwing salt about the room, and my mother-in-law was hiring people to come and do oharai, what's it called, purification rituals and stuff. So yeah, that's the worst of it, I suppose. But yeah, kind of makes you a believer, I guess. I don't know how our brains work, but
It's so
sorry.
difficult to process
I know, right?
all of
No.
that. And
hearing this, and somebody who's seen Ju-on probably too many times. And I'm going, you need to leave that house. It's
right?
oh man. And wow.
Yeah.
That's creepy stuff.
Yeah, and I didn't even know. It's another thing. It's how to process. Even now, I'm it was a new house, but it was built on old land, and I learned, I think after the fact, that it was just this crookedy old road, and there was a not too far from our house, a shrine called Kubitsuka Jinja, and Kubitsuka means the grave, the head grave. So I guess there was a time whenever where the samurai were coming through. There was 2 big fights or something, and they were coming through, and they just went through, and they just lopped off heads and lined them up along the street, and it's bad. The energy there's not supposed to be very good. So they built the shrine to kind of to dissipate that anything. But so there's it wasn't an old icky scary house, but I guess the land is kind of got bad energy in it or something, or creepy little men.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's it. I don't know. I don't know if it's some kind of my brain making sense of something that it's going to happen, or just that was a very weird many years of my life there.
Yeah, and it kind of sounds like with the like a shadow person, like if you have
Mm,
night terrors. Um, and normally, because one of the sensations is it feels like that they're sitting on your chest or your
yeah.
torso, but this figure actually touched you with their finger,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
I believe you can have that in night terrors, but it's just not as common. The
Oh.
the the fact that your son saw
Mm.
it rules out like night terror.
Ah.
So yeah, you
Yeah, you're
almost,
right. Like,
yeah, because they're not really shared. It's their that's a more psychological, personal type of thing.
hmm, hmm.
Um, but golly, that's creepy, man.
Yeah.
That's freaking creepy.
Yeah, yeah. I wrote it all down. Like I my journal, I just write, and it's really I can't read them. I'm like, just a lot. Still, it's a lot. Maybe when I get older,
Hmm.
and I'm like, okay, let's go. Um, yeah. So that's kind of yeah. So it's like I believe, but I'm not very excited to have anything happen to me. Like it's okay. Just you know,
Well,
I
I
wake
can
up in the middle of the
understand
night.
that,
And,
particularly when it seems like the things that have happened have not exactly been positive things. Not had a friendly Casper, the ghost,
right,
turn
right.
up and,
I mean,
treat
there
you to
were.
something.
Here you go. Go here. These are the lottery numbers.
Yeah,
Go buy the
yeah.
ticket tomorrow. Choose. Yeah. I mean, there's been like good periods in my, when I was doing martial arts and doing a lot of meditation, and it's like oh, enlightenment. This is so whatever. So you get in a really high state of something. But yeah, yeah, it's up and down. At least the old man here seems very kind. He doesn't do anything freaky. Uh, it's not a bad feeling here, so that's nice.
Yeah, we're gonna return to the old man shortly, in fact. But yeah, goodness, as Bob said, I
Oh,
mean, the fact that it was a shared experience, that your son saw it as well. Because I'm always, when something happens to me or when I'm hearing about something, I mean, I always find it fascinating, but then I try to play devil's advocate as well.
right, right.
But it's much harder to do when multiple people see it, particularly if there's no discussion. You
Mhm,
didn't
mhm.
say to your son, "This happened last night." He just came out with it.
Asked, yeah, yeah. That was really, yeah, yeah. I wouldn't tell him because it was just so freaky. But just yeah, did
Yeah.
Dad come home? And I'm like, what? That was just one of those moments where you just drop the spoon and you're like, okay, tell me what you saw.
So after then having the cancer diagnosis, I mean, did you have to have treatment in America? Did you have it in Japan? Like,
In America, I decided to stay, so that was that was good. I mean, it was a good. It's hard to say it's good, but just to be around my family for this. My husband was like gone all the time anyway. Very isolated here, and uh, Julian too, having my mom and dad around and making friends and stuff. So as bad as it was for me, I was just so glad it was me and not him. Like my whole time, it was a foreboding that something was going to happen to him, and that was just I just couldn't. I just couldn't. And then when it was me, I was like, okay, well at least it's me. It's not him. And please, let me live long enough that I can, see him get a little older and stuff. So it was very, uh, yeah, whatever it is. But being around my parents was nice, and yeah, came back and absolutely kind of purified the house, and my mother-in-law helped me there. So, and that's probably where the sticky came from with my mother-in-law.
and you never saw the shadow man again.
Actually, I did. I did one more
Oh,
time, but this
oh,
one it wasn't nothing really happened. But it's a scene I use in a book I'm writing and this was freaky too. And I don't know how long after that. It might have been before it. I really need to look at my journals, but um, sleeping and then waking up, I'm lying on my back, sleeping, looking up, but it feels like someone's on my back, like someone's like holding me, and then kind of looking down, and it's kind of like it's kanashi bari in Japanese, but what sleep paralysis where you can't move. But I'm kind of trying to look around, and then for some reason, like I can like see arms, so it's almost like how do you say? I'm lying on my back. There's a futon beneath me, but it's almost like he's holding me. And then when I look over, like his face was right here. It was like the same kind of sharp toothed dude, and bit my shoulder, and then woke up. And yeah, that wasn't fun either. And again, just incense and just get away, whatever this bad thing is. And yeah, my son too used to see things in his room, but his was always, and his too was, he didn't know about the whole lopping off the head things, but he did say when he was little that there was a head in his closet that used to come out at night and foot of his head. And yeah, it was, what's weird is that you expect that in like a spooky haunted house. So to have, this bright new home, him saying something like that, like, Mom, the head came out again last night. What? And there's a, I don't know if Michael knows it or not. His name is Mr. Magic, Mr. Madik or something. He's like a Japanese talent or something. He's a magician, but he's got a very distinctive face. And Julie just said, oh, he looks just like that. He looks just like Mr. Madik or something. And I was like, okay, so it is something you're seeing. If it's a dream or not, I don't know. But yeah, every once in a while we talk about it. Like, remember in the house? It's where things happened. During the day, it felt fine.
Yeah.
Just at night.
Yeah. You don't expect that from a new build. It's like, come on.
Yeah,
We got a new
right.
build.
Yeah, I want like this kind of house with the old stuff and everything.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But after that, fingers crossed, it's been staying away.
And the current place that you're in, so how long have you been in this place?
It's about 3-4 years. So left that house, was kind of in a little apartment for a while, and then came here. So so yeah. So this is, and also maybe, I don't know. I really believe that in Japan, like, it's so small, and like people have lived here for thousands of years. Like, just the land has so much history. Like, things have happened here that we don't know about. So you can go to places and it feels either really nice or it feels really creepy or something. So this place feels nice. So far so good. Everything's good.
Yeah, and you said that an old man had died in the house, that you knew about that. Okay, that's standard, people know. But then you said, because there are blood stains on the ceiling. This is not a normal comment as to how you know something, someone has died.
I'll send you the photo. It's almost, I don't know if it's really, but there are brown marks that look like a spray, like an arterial. I will send you the photo. And we joke because we were joking, like, what was it? It kind of had a really antiseptic smell, like maybe someone was bedridden here for a long time in this one room. And the house is all old, but there's one room that's totally refurbished. Like, everything is new in this one room. And we're like, wonder what happened here. So we have these stories we make up, like, grandma went mad and she went after grandpa. So we have no idea. We're just making all this up. We don't know. But one day we were sitting there, when we look up, and there's like these brown like spots that are leading away from a certain area. I'm like, try to wipe them off. They don't come off. So I'll go take a photo for you. I don't know. It could be anything. It could be a green tea for all I know. But it's a nice story for a.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, given, I suppose, your history with these encounters or these disquieting events, I guess there might be a part of you that's a little bit afraid to kind of paint over it, because it's like, well, what are they going to do then? Or like, you paint over it and then the next night there's like blood dripping from the ceiling. It's like, oh my God, just leave it alone.
Just leave it.
What's
Burn some
that
incense.
scene? I mean, it's in the ring. You weren't supposed to save her, and it's like you don't paint over it.
Right. You
Yeah.
think you're doing the right thing. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
It's
I'm
like, what
being
do you mean?
compassionate.
Oh, shit. Screwed up bad.
That's so funny, because that's the thing you think you're supposed to do, right? Like, oh, I was
Yeah.
magnanimous.
We'll
I
just
did the
paint
right
over it.
thing.
And you got that one older neighbor is like, oh, you should not have done that at
Oh, what did you
all.
do?
That's probably the worst thing you could have done. But you do you. I'm going to the car.
Yep. I do that a lot. Like, I think I'm doing the right thing, and it's like, nope, that wasn't the right thing. So, damn, there you go again. So yeah, so just kind of leave it. Don't sleep in that room, and Yeah, just every once in a while, if we smell smoke, we're like, "Oh, Grandpa's here today." So I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't feel very terrible. So that's
Did you
plus.
get the property at a bargain price because nobody else would touch it? You're nodding.
It was, yeah. It's we're renting, so that's that. And yeah, yeah. And it was it's a really nice old place. Like it's big and it's got parking lot and there's a park across the street and there's rice fields out back. So it's kind of like, yeah, why didn't anyone snap this up? I know now. I don't know. I do ask the neighbor kind of. I'm like, so what happened next door? And she's vague, like, oh, he was a really nice man, and I like them. And I'm like, oh, but I can't ask you. Like, well, how did they? you know. So I'm hoping she'll tell me one day, but so far, no details.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good thing about renting, that if you need to leave quickly, it's a lot easier.
I'll be in
But
the car.
I mean, I don't know what your experience has been, but it seems like unlike the UK and America, there's more of an argument to just rent rather than buy a property in Japan because, I mean, they're so frequently building new houses, I suppose, because it's such an earthquake prone environment that, unlike the UK, if you buy a house, chances are the value is going to plummet rather than, it be an investment. So, I mean, I
Right.
haven't bought a property yet. I sometimes think about it, and to be honest, the best way to perhaps make some money back is if you actually just buy an apartment. But then if you buy the apartment, you have to pay the kind of maintenance, which is a little bit like a rent anyway. So at that
hmm
point, is it worth it?
Right, right. I don't know either, but I'm that's where I'm right now. I'm kind of like just rent. Uh, you're right. Everything depreciates, and even the house before is it's worth now. Like the house is fine, but it's just worth the land, right? Because people are going to buy the new houses. They're not going to. Yeah. And then there's the old buy an old place and fix it up dream. Then again, what are you walking into when you when you buy an old place in Japan? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that seems to be like the way that quite a few Western people do it. But if you have a Japanese partner, then they're like, no, no, we can't do that. That there's almost like the fear as to, like, yeah, what are you doing? What could happen? So there's a lot of superstition.
Yes, yes. My mother-in-law would never like. Nope, nope. You're not gonna rent. No. Yeah, you don't know what happened there. you don't know. What,
Yeah,
so
yeah. I,
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I tend to find, and I mean, I don't know if this has been your experience too, but Japan is probably the most spiritual and superstitious country that isn't a religious country. It's so
That's a good
interesting.
way to put it. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, yeah. Because religion's no nothing but superstition and eat style, like telling things through the generations and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah, religion is, to me, is more of mankind's interpretation of you know different scriptures, different readings, and things like that, and trying to put it into a an organized type of thing. Um, and so it's man made.
Mm,
And when you're in a country that doesn't subscribe to any particular religion, but has thousands of years of folklore that's never been tainted, then it begins to make sense. And I didn't realize that about Japan until Michael said that, but that's why. And it's probably just not a Japanese thing, but you're noticing that because you're there. There's
mm,
probably other countries that are like that. Whereas in the United States, I mean, our folklore is like what Paul Bunyan,
I know.
I mean, Johnny Appleseed,
Appleseed.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's some, some cryptid stuff, but other than that, sadly is, we're a very religious nation. But we shouldn't be, you
Mm.
know, and because our history also has a lot to do with the occult
Mm.
that a lot of people, they don't realize until they actually see it for themselves, and they're like, "Oh, well, shit, that was the occult," you know.
Go
So,
back.
but yeah,
Well, yeah,
that's an
yeah.
interesting point that Michael made there. Very, very fascinating.
Well, even a broken clock is right twice a day, so occasionally an interesting point is made.
Yes.
And I mean, to go back to this idea that when you decided you were going to live in Japan, different pieces of your life were coming together, one of which being, okay, this is what I'm going to write about. I want to know what were some of the first stories or
Mhm.
articles, or what was your first exploration into writing about Japan?
That So when we first got married in the first house, I told you we had that one that was it was an old house, but it was very beautiful. And after we lived with the in-laws, we moved in there, and it was very surreal because again, this is pre-internet. I had moved from the city of Shizuoka to the small fishing town of Yaizu. I had no friends. The entire neighborhood was just elderly people, generations that have lived there, and I'm by myself. Didn't have my son or anything. And it was kind of like the house taught me about Japan. Like I was kind of, the tatami mat floors and the fusuma. And then the old ladies too would come in and we'd talk. And I was kind of learning about old Japan through the house. And it was a very quiet, quiet, interesting part of my life. And then after a couple years, our landlord, her daughter her daughter or something wanted to live in the house, so you have to leave. And it was like very quick. It was like, uh, the daughter is on this land, they're building a highway that's going through it, she needs to be in the house in 6 months and you need to leave. And I was just heartbroken because I just loved this house. So the first story I ever wrote was, it's called Sand Walls, Paper Doors. Sand walls is, the walls here are covered in sand, so the nice, what what it's not shiny, like everything's dim and woody and papery, and I just love that. So sand walls, paper doors would be the Fusuma doors, and it was about a girl, a lady or something living in a house and having to move, and just the spirits and the yokai and the things that taught her about living, and she's having to leave them, right? So it was a way. It was probably the first time I wrote a complete story as a way of healing, like kind of like I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. I love this house, and I wanted to thank the house, kind of. So I wrote that, and then that uh, got accepted and was in some whatever small magazine, and it kind of got like, oh, okay, that's right. I wanted to be a writer. Like, I had forgotten, I was doing all this university stuff. Like, that's right, I wanted to be a writer. So then I started listening more to the older ladies and my mother-in-law and all the superstitions. And it was so difficult because, nothing I could do was right. Everything I did was wrong. And it was like, I don't want to get angry. Like, oh, you don't do it that way. You got to do it this way. You got holes in your jeans. Don't put your jeans out on the laundry. That's embarrassing. Like, oh, okay. So instead of fighting everybody, I just like, okay, I got to figure out just why are things done this way? And that's when I started going to the library and started asking questions, and started writing stories about that. Just kind of at the time too. This is pre Cartoon Network, so no one really knew about Japan very much. So I was kind of I can introduce them to these ideas that are here. That I'm trying to think of another story in the in the first book, but just the idea of, your relatives are still with you, or they come back in a bone, or all these things. And yeah, so I just started collecting stories like that. So that was the beginning of the whole writing thing. And I made it my own genre. I called it mythical realism. So it's kind of like, okay, that'll work. I'm going to be famous. So
I
that's how
like
that all
it, and
started.
it fits your stories, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, just
I
bringing
think
the myth
the
real.
key to coining a new term is to just keep saying it enough until it gets into the zeitgeist. So,
You
and then
keep
when
saying
they Google mythical realism, they will see your name. It's all
it. Right
a
here.
plan.
Yeah. And that's how it feels too, right? Living here. It's talking about superstition and spiritualism and everything. It's just it's very close. Uh you know, I've told this story before, but going back to my ex's his grandmother. And during Obon, that period when people come back from the dead, she had an old broken clock. And it was like a grandfather clock. It wasn't very big. It was this old clock, and it was broken. Every time I went there, it was broken, broken, broken. I'd go back in August during this time, and it's working. And I'm like, "Oh, you got the clock fixed?" And she's like, "Oh no, that's Grandpa. He always makes it work when he goes." And no one raises an eyebrow. They're just like, "Yeah, it's Grandpa. Yeah, every year it happens." I'm like, no, people. The clock was broken. It was always broken. It's moving now. You're telling me it's going to stop when Grandpa leaves? Yeah, it'll stop eventually. And it does. So just things like that. And that people don't get excited about it. They're just like, yeah, that's what happened. So it's a different vibe, I guess, living here in this smaller town. Much, much different than the States.
Yeah, and I think, everything that's magical about Japan is amplified if you're in a smaller town, if you're in a rural community as opposed to one of the bigger
Mm,
cities. But I suppose, particularly thinking about this experience with the clock. I mean, one thing that's very exciting with Japan, it's almost like the land of possibility, and there's an excitement like these things could happen. There's almost ironically more possibility of an afterlife than if you live in a religious society, because the problem with religion is because it's been man-made. Now some people are going to turn off, but you can go back to the origin and then you can kind of disprove it. But if
mm,
you have all these superstitions that are kind of never questioned and they just happen and it's just part of the fabric, well, suddenly it's very difficult to disprove.
mhm. And ghostly things and stories through the generations, people telling, "Oh, remember that time that this happened?" And again, no one raising an eyebrow. Yes, yeah, I remember when that happened. Or, "Oh, Grandma told me this," or "My auntie so and so told me this," and it's so matter of fact
Mm-hmm.
that as an American, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, right," but no one else is doubting it. So weird things happen. I don't know, maybe.
The
I just
folklore and the superstitions have become a way of life, and
Mm.
that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really integrated. It's just like woven
Mm-hmm.
into. So, and again, like Michael said, like in the city, I don't know, maybe not so much, but go back to the where all the older people live, and they still believe all this for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the cities, like there's certainly still the very ritualistic element, but I think it does exist in the bigger cities, but it's just amplified in the smaller areas, in the rural areas, in what we term Inaka Japan. I think you've really
Mhm.
got an amplification there.
Yeah, I think so.